I want to ask all the things you told about the problem in the heart. For example, you said something about this here. If people cannot find out their heart, and if they cannot clarify the ideas which are coming from their nefs, especially nefs emmare, says, fujuraha wa taqwa. How can they differentiate? This is the true idea, or it is coming from my nefs emmare? I mean, how we can find out? Because all the problems, actually, I especially want to thank you because, for example, nowadays in Turkey, especially, most of the court cases are related to the parents. Find out how can we find our hearts, our intentions, how can we find out nefs emmare? I appreciate it.
So, I have a good and a bad answer for that question. The good answer is, or no, the bad answer is that Allah considers all of us completely self-aware. We're responsible before Allah on Judgment Day because we have complete awareness. If we did not have awareness, we would not be answerable. It's part of the mas'uliyah, the responsibility that Allah gave human beings, right? In fact, even before we were put on this earth, when Allah said, "Alastu bi rabbikum qalu bala shahidna," He said, "An takunu yawm al-qiyamati inna kunna an hadha ghafilin." So you don't get to say on Judgment Day, we were unaware of this, right? So awareness is actually something that we have as part of our being. One of the things that's happening in the world of psychology nowadays is there's this overemphasis on your subconscious, right? There's an overemphasis on your subconscious. So you said that, but let's unpack that. What's really going on? What did your mother say to you when you were 5? So that you can go back for everything you're doing now. Who can you blame? Your narcissistic mother, right? So the idea behind the harsh part of that, we have to understand that reality. We have now become people that are trying to take away from this idea of self-awareness. Now, that's the first problem I wanted to bring to your attention. The second problem is there is something called a lack of self-awareness. There is something, and that's called ghafla, in fact. It's called ghafla. And in that ghafla, for example, I can speak very harshly with someone without realizing how hurtful I'm being. I can say something, because I was studying balagha recently, so I'm reviewing some things in balagha. What's the purpose of a question? Just call it out. What's the purpose of a question? Yeah, to seek information, right? What's the time? The question. But if I say, don't you think it's stupid that you're going? Also a question. What's the purpose of that question? Insult. Right. The purpose of that question is to exact an insult. And the person turns around and says, why would you say that? I'm not saying anything. I'm just asking a what? Question. I'm just seeking information. Right? That is, and for some people, they can ask questions like that, and maybe they can tell themselves, no, I'm not being insulting. I'm simply asking a question. But I don't give that free license to most people. Most people are pretty aware that when they're doing that, they're doing something bad. Now, when it comes to genuine lack of awareness, how do we know if our nafs al-ammara is pushing us towards something? Like you mentioned, this powerful entity, inna nafsa la'ammaratun bisu. It's interesting that in the Quran, there are two phrases together. وَمَا أُبَرِّئُ نَفْسِي إِنَّ النَّفْسَ لَأَمَّارَةٌ بِالسُّوءِ. The first part of it, Yusuf alayhi salam, or Zulaykha is saying, I don't consider my nafs innocent. I don't consider it innocent. The nafs definitely commands to evil things. So part of my nafs is it's going to push me to do or say evil things. It's part of its job. Now, how do you develop that awareness? To me, I believe that's actually one of the great gifts of Allah in Revelation, that the word of Allah is actually constantly making you reflect on yourself. It's constantly making me think about myself. Salah was an institution Allah's Prophet gave us, alayhi salatu wasalam, 5 times a day, and in that salah we're supposed to be reciting the Quran, and the Quran is supposed to be a self-reflecting mechanism. I'm standing there in front of God, saying His words, and those words have a deep impact on what I'm going through in my life, you know? And sometimes, for example, I'll give you a simplest example, even if you don't know the entire Quran, everybody's at least reciting the Fatiha, isn't it? So at least you know what Fatiha means, right? Here you have, for example, you had an argument with your mother, with your husband, with your wife, with your sister, with your brother, somebody, you had an argument. And you know that there's two parts of an argument: being wrong and saying it the wrong way. Two parts, right? So I could be right, but I said it the wrong way, right? Or I could be wrong, but I said it the right way, right? There's two parts. Now, everybody, I believe, at least I'll speak for myself. I know when I'm right, but I said it the wrong way. I also know when I'm wrong. And I defended it by saying it the right way. I know. When I stand in front of Allah and say, Allah, guide us to the straight path, did Allah not guide my conscience in that moment to know which part is wrong and which part is right? And when this prayer is done, I should maybe go back and say, hey, I shouldn't have said that way. That was hurtful. Actually, I was wrong. I was just insisting on my answer because I don't want you to win. That's why I was insisting on it. But I knew. What's the Quran doing? It's forcing me. If I'm going to ask Allah genuinely for guidance and being on the straight path, then I was just going on this path and that path in the last conversation I just had. With what face, with what mouth am I asking Allah to be on the right path when I'm not interested in the right path myself? Right? So introspection, clear introspection is what the Quran genuinely offers. This is why لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَفَكَّرُونَ لِيَدَّبَّرُوا آيَاتِهِ فِيهِ ذِكْرُكُمْ. It's talking about you, so they contemplate its ayats, right? To me, it's one of those practices that has been lost. Quran has just become tafsir study. Quran has just become recitation. Quran has just become tajweed. But Quran, it's no longer a reflection on the self. One of the roles of the Quran is reflection on the self, and it needs to be restored.